The ice planet Xylandra was dying. Once a thriving mining colony and outpost for interplanetary resource extraction, it now lay in the grip of extreme climate collapse. Storms ravaged its surface with unprecedented ferocity, each one more violent than the last, while temperatures plummeted to levels that even the most advanced thermal technology struggled to withstand. It was in this unforgiving wasteland that Lyria found herself stranded. A Verilyn bioengineer, Lyria's delicate lavender skin and large iridescent eyes marked her as distinctly non-human, though her humanoid form allowed her to navigate most interplanetary habitats with relative ease. Her species was known throughout the galaxy for their exceptional aptitude in biological sciences, a gift that had become both their blessing and their curse. The Verilyns were facing extinction from a genetic plague, and Lyria carried the burden of their salvation, collecting rare biological samples with unique adaptive properties that might save her people. Now, however, she was fighting for her own survival. The year was 2274, deep into what historians called the post-terraform age. Humanity had spread across countless worlds, terraforming and exploiting them until many, like Xylandra, began to collapse under the strain. As planetary systems failed, social order often followed. The frontier worlds were particularly lawless, with shadowy groups operating beyond the reach of any central authority. Arcturus 7 stood as a testament to this decline. Once a bustling cold storage station in low orbit around Xylandra, it now hung abandoned and forgotten, a skeletal remnant of more prosperous times. Its massive chambers, designed to preserve various goods and materials at sub-zero temperatures, had been left to slowly deteriorate as corporations moved on to more profitable ventures. Lyria had never intended to visit this derelict station. Her transport vessel had been scheduled to merely pass by Xylandra's orbit on its way to the biodiversity reserves of Helios 9. But fate had other plans. An energy surge had ripped through the ship's propulsion system just as they entered Xylandra's debris field. In the chaos that followed, Lyria had been thrown into an emergency evacuation pod, a pod that malfunctioned, sending her directly toward the abandoned Arcturus 7 station, rather than to the designated rescue coordinates. The impact had been violent, but survivable. Her pod had torn through the station's outer hull and crashed into one of the cold storage chambers. The last thing she remembered before blacking out was the shriek of tearing metal and the sudden, biting cold that rushed in to greet her. When Lyria regained consciousness, she found herself in complete darkness. The station's power systems had long since failed, and her pod's emergency beacon had been damaged beyond repair in the crash. Her environment suit had protected her from the worst of the impact, but a quick self-assessment revealed that her thermal regulator had been crushed. In the faint blue glow of her emergency light, Lyria took stock of her surroundings. The storage chamber was vast, its ceiling lost in darkness above her. Metal shelving units stretched in every direction, most empty, some still containing forgotten crates and containers. Frost covered every surface, glittering eerily in her light's beam. But it was the temperature that concerned her most. Without her thermal regulator, her suit could not protect her for long. Xylandra was experiencing one of its infamous ice storms, and the temperature inside the station was dropping rapidly. Her suit's environmental display flashed a warning, 80 degrees C and falling. Verilans could tolerate lower temperatures than humans, but not by much. Without heat, she would be dead within hours. Survival became her only priority. Lyria knew she needed to find shelter, heat, and a way to signal for help. But as the violent winds of Xylandra's storm screamed through the breaches in the station's hull, she realized this would be no simple task. Her gaze fell to her suit. It was designed with multiple layers of specialized fabric, not as heavy-duty as a proper Arctic suit would be, but engineered with some thermal retention properties. In a moment of desperate clarity, Lyria understood what she needed to do. If she couldn't find heat, She would have to create it herself, even if that meant sacrificing the very clothing that was keeping her alive. The decision was made with the cold pragmatism of someone who understood that survival sometimes required terrible choices. She would burn her clothing, piece by piece, to stay alive long enough to find help or be rescued. The first night began with this grim resolve, and as Lyria tore away the outer layer of her suit to create her first small fire, she had no way of knowing that this was just the beginning of a 4-day ordeal that would test the limits of her endurance, her ingenuity, and ultimately, her faith in others. The storm outside intensified, hurling ice crystals against the station's hull with such force that they sounded like gunfire. Inside, huddled beside her small flame, Lyria shivered and planned her next move, wondering if anyone would find her before she ran out of clothes to burn. Night 1, 24 hours. The first priority was finding a place sheltered from the howling winds that cut through the station like knives. Lyria dragged herself through the darkness, her emergency light casting eerie blue shadows across the frost-covered surfaces of the abandoned cold storage facility. Each breath formed a dense cloud before her face, and she could feel the cold beginning to seep through her damaged suit. A fallen storage rack created a small alcove against one wall, offering minimal protection from the direct wind currents. Lyria huddled there, her back pressed against the icy metal, and assessed her resources. The diagnostic display on her wrist showed her suit's power reserves dropping rapidly as it struggled to maintain even basic life support functions without the thermal regulator. "Think, Lyria," she whispered to herself, her voice immediately swallowed by the vastness of the chamber. "Resources. What do you have?" Her inventory was grim: a damaged emergency beacon, a nearly depleted sonar scanner, a small utility knife, and the clothes on her back. No food, no water, no heat source. The cold was becoming unbearable. Already, she could feel the tips of her fingers growing numb, and a dangerous drowsiness was beginning to cloud her thoughts, the first warning sign of hypothermia. She needed heat immediately. With trembling hands, Lyria reached for the outer layer of her environmental suit. It was designed to protect against radiation and minor temperature fluctuations, not the extreme cold of an ice storm. The material was thin but durable, woven with nanofibers that would, she hoped, burn slowly enough to provide sustained heat. Using her knife, she cut away a section from her sleeve, careful to preserve as much of the rest of the garment as possible. She then gathered some empty packaging materials from nearby, desiccated cardboard and synthetic packing materials, and arranged them in a small pile. Creating a spark without proper tools was the next challenge. Lyria removed a small communication chip from her suit's collar. By shorting its power connections with her knife, she managed to create a small spark that, after several attempts, caught the edge of the packaging material. A tiny flame bloomed in the darkness. The relief was immediate, but short-lived. The materials burned quickly, threatening to die out before they could ignite her suit fabric. With a silent prayer to whatever cosmic forces might be listening, Lyria carefully fed the piece of her sleeve into the flame. For a heart-stopping moment, nothing happened. Then, with a small hiss, the fabric began to burn. The flame was small but steady, casting a warm orange glow that stood in stark contrast to the blue-white ice surrounding her. Lyria stretched her hands toward the precious heat, feeling life flow back into her fingers. She knew this fire wouldn't last long, perhaps an hour if she was lucky, but it bought her time to think, to plan. As she huddled near the flame, Lyria activated her sonar scanner. Its power was low, but she needed to map her surroundings if she had any hope of finding a way out of this frozen tomb. The device emitted a faint pulse, and after a moment, displayed a rudimentary map of the immediate area. The cold storage chamber she occupied was one of many, connected by a network of corridors that eventually led to a central control room. If any part of the station still had power, it would be there. If any communication equipment remained functional, She would find it there as well. But the distance was daunting. Nearly half a kilometer of dark, frozen corridors. In her current condition, it might as well have been 1,000 miles. The scanner's display flickered, then died. Battery depleted. Lyria allowed herself a moment of despair before tucking the device away. She had seen enough to have a general sense of direction, at least. Her small fire was already beginning to fade. With careful precision, she cut away another section of her outer suit and added it to the flames. The material caught quickly this time, but Lyria couldn't help but think of what this meant. She was literally burning away her protection to stay alive. Is anyone even looking for me? The thought intruded unbidden into her mind. The transport ship would have reported the accident, but in the chaos of the energy surge and subsequent evacuation, would anyone have noticed her pod's divergent trajectory? Would they even know to look for her on this abandoned station? Doubt was a luxury she couldn't afford. Lyria forced the thoughts away and focused on immediate concerns. The fire had warmed her enough to think clearly again, but she needed more than just temporary heat. She needed a sustainable plan. As the hours passed, Lyria established a grim routine. She would burn small sections of her outer suit, using the brief periods of warmth to explore her immediate surroundings for anything useful. During one such expedition, she discovered a cache of forgotten maintenance supplies, including, miraculously, a small container of industrial lubricant. Oil, it would burn. This find allowed her to be more conservative with her clothing, mixing small amounts of the lubricant with pieces of her suit to extend the burning time. Still, by the end of the first 24 hours, her outer suit was almost entirely gone, sacrificed to keep her core temperature high enough to survive. The storm outside showed no signs of abating. If anything, it seemed to be intensifying, with winds that made the entire station groan and shudder. Lyria had managed to move closer to one of the corridors leading toward the central control room, but her progress was agonizingly slow. As the last piece of her outer suit burned down to embers, Lyria huddled in the fading warmth and tried to quiet her growing fear. She was alive, but for how much longer? How many more layers of clothing could she sacrifice before there was nothing left between her and the killing cold? In the darkness beyond her small fire, something moved, a shadow passing quickly across her field of vision. There and gone so quickly, she couldn't be certain she'd seen it at all. Lyria froze, straining her eyes against the darkness. The abandoned station was supposed to be deserted, but rumors persisted throughout this sector of space. Rumors of a pirate crew called the Bloodfrost, who used abandoned facilities like this one as hideouts for their illicit operations, including, it was said, organ trafficking and illegal genetic experimentation. Was she truly alone in this frozen hell? Or had her presence awakened something best, left undisturbed? The embers of her fire died, plunging her back into darkness. Lyria held her breath, listening. For a moment, there was only the howl of the storm. Then, faintly, she heard it, the soft crunch of frost under a careful footstep, somewhere in the darkness beyond. Night 2, 48 hours. The temperature continued to drop as Xylandra's storm raged unabated. Lyria had spent the last few hours in a state of heightened alertness, moving silently through the frozen corridors of Arcturus 7, stopping periodically to listen for any signs of the presence she'd detected earlier. So far, she had neither seen nor heard anything definitive, but the feeling of being watched persisted. Her suit's inner lining was now her only substantial protection against the cold, designed more for comfort than insulation. It would not keep her alive for long without additional heat. The small container of industrial lubricant she'd found was nearly empty, and she had begun to eye the bandages and padding in her suit's medical compartment with desperate calculation. Lyria's body was beginning to show the strain of prolonged exposure to extreme cold. Her movements were becoming sluggish, and periods of intense shivering alternated with dangerous moments of seeming warmth. Her body's false signal that things were improving when, in fact, she was slipping deeper into hypothermia. Finding a recessed maintenance alcove that offered some protection from the wind, Lyria prepared to make another fire. Her fingers, now clumsy with cold, fumbled with the knife as she cut away a portion of her suit's inner lining. The fabric was thinner than the outer layer had been, but it would burn. It had to. As she worked, Lyria found her thoughts drifting to her mission, the biological samples she had been transporting, rare specimens that held the key to saving her people from extinction. The samples were secured in a specialized container designed to withstand extreme conditions, currently strapped to her body beneath her remaining clothing. At least they were safe, even if she might not live to deliver them. The makeshift fire caught with surprising ease, the synthetic fibers of the inner lining producing a blue-tinged flame that gave off more heat than she had expected. Lyria huddled close, savoring the temporary reprieve from the cold's grip. It was during this moment of relative comfort that she noticed the station's internal communication panel embedded in the wall of the alcove. It was an older model, likely predating the station's abandonment, but there was a chance, however slim, that it might still function. Lyria pried the panel open with her knife, exposing a tangle of wires and circuitry encrusted with frost. Using the heat from her small fire, she carefully thawed the components, wiping away moisture with what remained of her sleeve. Then, crossing the fingers of both hands in the universal gesture of hope, she pressed the power activation sequence. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, with a crackle of static that made her heart leap, the panel's display flickered to life. The power levels were minimal, likely drawing from some emergency backup system that had somehow survived the years of neglect. But it was active. Lyria quickly scanned through the communication channels, searching for any sign of activity. Most returned nothing but dead air, but on one frequency, she detected something that made her blood run cold despite the warmth of her fire. Movement. Somewhere in the station, someone or something was moving. The signal was faint and intermittent, but unmistakable. The motion sensors in another section of the station were being triggered. Lyria stared at the display, her mind racing. Was it simply debris being tossed about by the storm winds? A malfunctioning system generating false readings? Or was it evidence that she was not alone? The stories of the Bloodfrost pirates flooded back into her mind. They were said to be ruthless opportunists who specialized in salvaging valuable biological materials, including organs from unfortunate victims who crossed their path. A Verilyn bioengineer would be a prize indeed for such people, both for her specialized knowledge and for the rarity of her species. Lyria's fire was beginning to die down, and with it, the surge of hope the functioning communication panel had brought. She had found no rescue signals, no indication that anyone was searching for her. All she had discovered was the possibility that she might be sharing this frozen derelict with something far more dangerous than the cold. With the last of the lubricant, she managed to extend her fire's life long enough to warm a ration bar she had found in her suit's emergency pocket. The food was tasteless and barely sufficient, but it provided essential energy her body desperately needed. As she ate, Lyria made a decision. She would continue toward the central control room, but with greater caution now. If there were others on the station, they might have access to heat and communication equipment. They might even be legitimate salvagers or maintenance personnel rather than pirates. But she couldn't risk revealing herself until she knew for certain. Gathering her remaining possessions, Lyria prepared to move on. The fire had burned down to embers, and she knew she couldn't afford to burn any more of her clothing until absolutely necessary. She would have to endure the cold and keep moving to generate what body heat she could. As she stepped out of the alcove, a flicker of movement at the far end of the corridor caught her eye. A shadow, human-sized, sliding quickly out of sight around a corner. Lyria's heart hammered in her chest. She hadn't imagined it. Someone was definitely there. Fear urged her to retreat, to hide. But reason reminded her that in this cold, isolation meant death. Whoever was out there might represent her only chance at survival. Drawing a deep breath that crystallized before her face, Lyria called out, "Hello? I'm not a threat. I need help." Her voice echoed down the frozen corridor, bouncing back at her from ice-coated walls. For several long moments, there was no response. Then, just as she was about to call again, she heard it, a soft scraping sound, like someone or something dragging itself across the floor, moving away from her. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature ran down Lyria's spine. Whatever was out there didn't want to be found. For the next several hours, Lyria made slow progress through the station, constantly alert for further signs of the mysterious presence. The corridors twisted and branched, forming a labyrinth that her depleted sonar scanner could no longer help her navigate. Twice more she caught glimpses of movement, a shadow here, a quickly retreating figure there, but never clear enough to identify. By the time she estimated 48 hours had passed since her crash landing, Lyria's condition had deteriorated significantly. Her extremities were now constantly numb, and she found herself periodically confused and disoriented, dangerous symptoms of advancing hypothermia. She had been forced to burn another section of her inner suit lining, leaving her with alarmingly little protection. Finding a junction where several corridors met, Lyria slumped against a wall, exhaustion overwhelming her. She needed rest, but rest without heat in these temperatures meant death. With fingers that barely obeyed her commands, she cut away a portion of the medical bandaging from her suit and prepared to light it. As the small flame caught and grew, illuminating the junction in flickering orange light, Lyria noticed something etched into the frost-covered wall opposite her position. Moving closer, she brushed away the ice crystals to reveal words scratched into the metal beneath. "Not alone! Hide!" The warning, for what else could it be, sent a jolt of adrenaline through Lyria's system. Someone had left this message, perhaps for her, perhaps for others who might find themselves trapped in this frozen nightmare. But hide from what? The Blood Frost pirates? Or something else entirely? As if in answer to her unspoken question, a loud metallic groan echoed through the station, followed by the unmistakable sound of a pressure door sealing somewhere in the distance. Someone was moving through the station with purpose, operating systems that Lyria had assumed were long dead. The flame from her bandages was dying, and with it would go her last source of heat. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Lyria grabbed her knife and cut away a larger section of her inner suit, leaving her upper body protected by only the thinnest layer of her undergarments. The cold hit her exposed skin like a physical blow, but she forced herself to focus on creating a more substantial fire. As the larger flame took hold, illuminating a wider area around her, Lyria noticed something that had been hidden in the shadows, small footprints in the frost covering the floor, leading away down one of the corridors. Recent footprints, not yet refilled with the frost that continuously formed on every surface. Someone had been here, watching her, perhaps following her, and now they had left a trail. With a determination born of desperation, Lyria gathered her meager belongings and what remained of her fire's heat. She would follow those footprints, whether they led to friend or foe. They represented her best chance at finding another living being in this frozen tomb, someone who might help her survive the killing cold. As she moved down the corridor, following the trail of footprints, Lyria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being led somewhere deliberately. Was this a trap? Or was someone trying to guide her to safety? The footprints led her deeper into the station, through areas where the damage from the storm was less severe. Eventually, they brought her to a sealed door marked Emergency Control Center. If any part of the station still had functioning systems, it would be here. If there was any way to send a distress signal to the outside world, she would find it behind this door. But the door was locked, its electronic access panel dark and unresponsive. Lyria tried to pry it open with her knife, but the blade merely skittered across the metal surface, leaving no mark. Exhausted and increasingly desperate, Lyria slumped against the door. She had followed the footprints to what seemed like salvation, only to be stopped by an impassable barrier. The irony was almost too much to bear. As her consciousness began to fade, her body's defenses weakening against the relentless cold, Lyria thought she heard something from the other side of the door, a soft tapping, as if someone were trying to communicate in code. With the last of her strength, she tapped back, a simple pattern, 3 short, 3 long, 3 short. The universal distress signal, ancient even by the standards of 2274. The tapping on the other side stopped abruptly. Then, just as darkness was beginning to close in around the edges of Lyria's vision, she heard a new sound, the mechanical whir of servos activating, and the metallic click of a lock disengaging. The door to the emergency control center began to open. Night 3, 72 hours. The emergency control center was not the salvation Lyria had hoped for. Though the room was marginally warmer than the corridors outside, perhaps 10 degrees warmer, which made it merely life-threateningly cold instead of instantly fatal. It was clear that whatever systems remained operational were running on the barest minimum of emergency power. Most of the control stations were dark, their screens either shattered or frozen in time, displaying the last information they had received before the station's abandonment. A few emergency lights still functioned, casting the room in an eerie red glow that made the frost patterns on the walls look disturbingly like bloodstains. Most concerning of all, there was no sign of whoever had opened the door for her. The room appeared empty, yet Lyria couldn't shake the feeling that she was being observed. "I know someone's here," she called out, her voice hoarse from cold and disuse. "Please, I mean no harm. I just want to survive until rescue comes." No answer came, but as Lyria moved further into the room, she noticed a small portable heater placed conspicuously in the center of the floor. It was an older model, the kind used by maintenance workers in isolated sections of space stations. But it was clearly functional. A faint orange glow emanated from its heating element. Lyria approached it cautiously, half expecting a trap, but the warmth it offered was real, if minimal. She knelt beside it, extending her hands toward the blessed heat, feeling sensation painfully return to her frozen fingers. "Thank you," she said to the empty room, certain now that someone had left this for her deliberately. "My name is Lyria. I'm a Verilyn bioengineer. My transport was damaged in the storm, and I crashed here by accident." Still no response, but the heater's power suddenly increased, the orange glow intensifying, providing more warmth. A deliberate action. Someone was controlling it remotely, listening to her. Taking this as encouragement, Lyria continued, "I'm on a mission to transport biological samples that could save my species from extinction. I need to survive long enough to complete this mission. Can you help me?" A soft mechanical whir drew her attention to one of the control stations that had appeared dormant. Its screen flickered to life, displaying a simple text message. "Blood frost comes, not safe here." Lyria's blood ran cold despite the heater's warmth. So the rumors were true. The notorious pirates did use this station, and apparently, they were coming. "Who are you?" she typed on the keyboard beneath the screen. "Why are you helping me?" The response came quickly. "Survivor, like you." Before Lyria could ask more questions, a distant boom echoed through the station, the sound of an exterior airlock cycling. Someone had docked with the station. The screen flashed an urgent message. "Hide now!" The heater switched off abruptly, plunging the room back into freezing darkness. Lyria understood. Heat signatures could be detected by scanners. Whoever her mysterious benefactor was, They were trying to help her avoid detection, moving quickly despite her exhaustion and the returning cold. Lyria searched for a hiding place. The control room offered few options, but she eventually discovered a maintenance crawlspace beneath one of the console stations. It was tight and uncomfortable, but it would conceal her from casual observation. As she squeezed into the confined space, Lyria's hand brushed against something unexpected, a small fabric bundle. Pulling it into what little light remained, she found it contained a thin thermal blanket and a small protein ration. More gifts from her unseen ally. Wrapping the blanket around her shoulders, Lyria huddled in her hiding place and listened intently. For a long while, there was nothing but the howl of the storm and the occasional groan of the station's structure. Then, new sounds began to filter through. Heavy footsteps, the clank of equipment, voices. "The waste of time," a gruff voice was saying. "Station's been picked clean years ago." "Orders are orders," replied another voice, higher pitched, but no less harsh. "Boss says check all abandoned outposts in the sector. Says there might be salvage from that transport ship that went down." Lyria's heart raced. They were looking for crash survivors, looking for her. "Any life signs?" asked the first voice. A pause, then. "Nothing definitive. Some anomalous readings. But this storm's playing hell with the scanners. Could just be energy fluctuations. Let's make a sweep anyway. You take the lower levels. I'll check the control centers." The footsteps separated. One set, moving away. The other coming closer. Lyria pressed herself deeper into her hiding space, trying to control her breathing. The thermal blanket would help mask her body heat, but not if a scanner was held at close range. The control room door slid open, and heavy boots thumped across the frost-covered floor. Through a small gap in the console above her, Lyria could see a portion of the intruder, a tall figure in a heavy Arctic suit, the kind used for extended EVA operations in extreme conditions. The suit was matte black with crimson accents, the colors of the Blood Frost pirates. The pirate moved methodically through the room, checking each console, occasionally consulting a handheld scanner. Lyria held her breath as the boots approached her hiding place, stopping just inches from where she was concealed. The scanner in the pirate's hand beeped softly. "Huh," the voice muttered. "That's odd." Lyria's heart felt like it might explode from her chest. She had been detected. In moments, she would be dragged from her hiding place. Her mission failed. Her life perhaps forfeit. But then, unexpectedly, an alarm blared from another section of the station. The pirate's head snapped up. "What the hell was that?" The communicator on their wrist crackled. "Did you trigger something?" "Negative," the pirate near Lyria responded. "Proximity alarm in Sector 7. Something's moving down there. I'm not picking up anything on scanners. Check it out anyway. Could be our salvage trying to make a run for it." Without further investigation of Lyria's hiding place, the pirate moved quickly out of the control room, heading toward the source of the alarm. Lyria remained frozen in place, scarcely believing her luck. After several minutes of silence, the screen on the console above her flickered back to life. Distraction worked. They will search for 2 hours. Follow map. A crude diagram appeared on the screen, showing a route through the station to what appeared to be a small auxiliary docking port. "My ship there. Come when safe." Lyria's mysterious benefactor had not only hidden her, but created a diversion to draw the pirates away. And now, they were offering escape. It seemed too good to be true, which made Lyria hesitate. Why would a stranger take such risks for her? Before she could type a question, the screen displayed one final message. "Hurry, storm worsening, 2-hour window." The screen went dark. Lyria weighed her options. Remaining hidden might keep her safe from the pirates temporarily, but the cold would claim her soon enough. Her inner suit was now in tatters from the portions she had burned for heat, leaving her with only her thin base layer, essentially underwear designed to prevent static electricity and provide minimal life support. It would not protect her from the station's killing cold for much longer. Following the map meant trusting this unknown ally. A risk, certainly, but one that offered at least a chance of survival. Decision made. Lyria emerged from her hiding place and studied the map she had memorized. The route would take her through some of the most damaged sections of the station, areas where the hull breaches would expose her to near-vacuum conditions and temperatures approaching 100 degrees Celsius. Even with the thermal blanket, such exposure could be fatal. But she had no choice. If she stayed, she would die. If she tried to reach the auxiliary docking port, she might die, but she might also escape. Gathering her remaining strength, Lyria prepared for what could be her final journey. She carefully secured the biological sample container that remained strapped to her body, ensuring it would survive, even if she did not. Then, with the thermal blanket wrapped tightly around her, she left the relative safety of the control room and ventured back into the frozen corridors of Arcturus 7. The journey was a nightmare of cold and darkness. The route took her through maintenance tunnels, barely large enough for her to crawl through, past hull breaches where the vacuum of space was held at bay only by emergency force fields that flickered alarmingly, and across chambers where the ice was so thick it had formed crystalline sculptures that resembled twisted, reaching hands. Twice, she nearly encountered the searching pirates, forced to hide in recesses barely large enough to contain her shivering form while they passed by, their scanner beams sweeping methodically across the frozen landscape of the station's interior. Her strength was fading. The minimal protection offered by her remaining clothing and the thermal blanket was inadequate against the relentless cold. Several times, Lyria found herself stopping, leaning against a wall, her eyes drifting closed, the dangerous siren call of hypothermic sleep beckoning her to surrender. Each time, she forced herself back to alertness, focusing on her mission, on the sample she carried, on the unknown ally who had risked their safety to help her. She would not give up, not when she had come so far. As she approached the final stretch of corridor leading to the auxiliary docking port, Lyria made a surprising discovery. The walls here were covered with notes, actual physical papers affixed to the ice-encrusted metal, scientific formulas, biological diagrams, equations she recognized as genetic manipulation protocols. Someone had been using this section of the station as a laboratory or study area, and from what Lyria could discern with her trained eye, they were working on something remarkably similar to her own research. Adaptive genetic modifications designed to help a species survive in changing environments. Could her mysterious benefactor be a fellow scientist? Perhaps someone who recognized the value of her mission and the sample she carried. There was no time to investigate further. According to her internal chronometer, the 2-hour window was nearly expired. The pirates would soon return to continue their search. The door to the auxiliary docking port loomed ahead, its access panel glowing with a faint blue light, one of the few systems in the station still receiving power. Lyria approached cautiously, expecting another locked barrier. But to her surprise, the door slid open at her approach. Beyond it lay a small airlock chamber, and beyond that, she could see the outline of a ship docked at the external port. It was small, a personal transport vessel rather than a commercial craft, with no identifying markings visible from her position. Lyria hesitated at the threshold. Once she entered that airlock, she would be committed. If this was a trap, there would be no escape. A noise from behind made the decision for her, voices and footsteps growing louder. The pirates were returning. Lyria lunged forward, passing through the door, which slid shut behind her, with a reassuring hiss of sealing mechanisms engaging. The airlock chamber was noticeably warmer than the corridor, still cold, but not deadly so. A voice came through a speaker in the ceiling. "Prepare for decompression. Secure yourself." The voice was distorted by the comm system, making it impossible to determine gender or species. But it had a gentleness that eased some of Lyria's fears. Handholds extended from the walls of the airlock. Lyria grasped them tightly as the outer door began to cycle open, exposing the chamber to the void of space. The thermal blanket whipped around her in the escaping air before the artificial gravity compensated, stabilizing her position. Through the opening door, Lyria could now see the ship clearly. It was indeed small, a salvage vessel, by the look of its modified cargo holds and reinforced hull plating. The name, Thorn 1, was painted in faded letters across its bow. A figure stood in the ship's airlock, silhouetted against the interior lights. As Lyria watched, uncertain whether to proceed, the figure extended a hand in a universal gesture of welcome. "Come on!" a voice called, the words distorted by the thin atmosphere between them. "Get inside. You'll live." It was the most direct communication she had received from her mysterious ally, and the simple promise, "You'll live," resonated with Lyria's desperate need for survival. Still, she hesitated. The Bloodfrost pirates were known for their cruelty and deception. Could this be an elaborate trap? The ship's name, Thorn 1, was unfamiliar to her, not known to be associated with the pirates, but that meant little in the lawless expanse of the outer territories. Behind her, through the inner airlock door, she could hear the pirates attempting to override the lock. They would break through eventually. Lyria made her decision. Whatever awaited her on that ship, it could not be worse than the certain death that awaited her if she remained on the station, either from the cold or at the hands of the pirates. With the last of her strength, Lyria pushed off from the airlock wall and propelled herself toward the waiting ship. The figure reached out, strong hands grasping her arms, pulling her into the relative warmth and safety of the Thorn 1's airlock chamber. As the outer door sealed behind her, Lyria finally got a clear look at her rescuer. It was a human man, tall and weathered, with dark skin and eyes that seemed to hold both wariness and compassion. Not the delicate, ghostly figure she had glimpsed in the station's corridors. "Welcome aboard," he said, his voice gruff, but not unkind. "I'm Thorn. This is my ship." Before Lyria could respond, her legs buckled beneath her, the last of her endurance finally exhausted. As consciousness slipped away, she felt strong arms catch her, preventing her fall. "Roz!" Thorn called to someone out of her field of vision. "Get the medbay ready. We've got a survivor, and she's in bad shape." The last thing Lyria saw before darkness claimed her was a second figure hurrying toward them, smaller, quicker, with movements that seemed oddly familiar. Then nothing but blessed darkness and, for the first time in 3 days, the absence of cold. Dawn of the 4th day. Warmth. That was Lyria's first conscious sensation as awareness gradually returned. Not the biting, burning heat of her desperate fires, but a gentle, encompassing warmth that seemed to seep into her very bones. She was lying on something soft, a medical berth. Her mind gradually recognized, covered with thermal blankets, far more sophisticated than the thin emergency covering she had been given on the station. Soft lights glowed overhead, and the gentle hum of life support systems created a soothing background noise. For a moment, Lyria wondered if she had died. If this comfort was some afterlife her people believed in, but she had always doubted. Then pain intruded, the deep ache of tissues recovering from severe cold exposure, the sharp sting of frostbite being treated, and she knew she was very much alive. Turning her head slightly, she saw medical equipment arranged around her berth. Some she recognized. Some were clearly jury-rigged from salvaged parts. But all appeared functional. A fluid drip fed into her arm, delivering what she guessed was a rehydration solution with electrolytes. "You're awake. Good." The voice came from her other side. Lyria turned to find Thorn sitting in a chair beside her berth, his large frame seeming incongruous in the confined space of what she now recognized as a small ship's medical bay. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, suggesting he had been watching over her for some time. How long? Lyria asked, her voice a rasp. About 18 hours, Thorne replied. You were pretty far gone when we pulled you in. Another hour out there, and we'd be having a very different conversation. Or none at all. 18 hours. That meant she had survived a full 3 days and nights in the killing cold of Arcturus 7, plus most of a fourth day unconscious, but alive. The storm? She managed to ask. Passing, Thorne said. We're clear of it now, on course for Helios 9. Should be there in about 20 standard hours. Helios 9, her original destination. Somehow, this stranger had known where she needed to go. As if reading her thoughts, Thorne added, Your mission parameters were in the station logs. When your emergency beacon went active, it transmitted your identity and destination before failing. That explained how he knew where to take her, but not why he had come for her in the first place, or how he had managed to help her while remaining unseen for so long. You saved me, Lyria said, the words inadequate for the debt she felt. But I don't understand. Who are you? Not just a salvager. A ghost of a smile crossed Thorne's weathered face. Salvager, transporter, occasional rescuer of stranded engineers. Depends on the contract. Contract? Lyria felt a chill that had nothing to do with her recovering body. Had someone hired him to retrieve her? Or worse, to retrieve the samples she carried? Seeing her alarm, Thorne raised a placating hand. Not what you're thinking. I have an arrangement with certain research institutions. They alert me when their personnel might be in trouble in my operational area. I check it out. Render assistance if possible. They pay me a retainer plus expenses. And if rescue isn't possible? Lyria asked, unable to keep a note of suspicion from her voice. Thorne's expression darkened. Then I make sure whatever they were carrying gets where it needs to go. He met her eyes directly. I'm not Bloodfrost, if that's what you're worried about. Those bastards give honest salvagers a bad name. Before Lyria could respond, the medical bay door slid open, and a second figure entered, the same quick, small shape she had glimpsed before losing consciousness. Our patient is awake. The newcomer's voice was high and melodic, with an accent Lyria couldn't place. Excellent timing. The cellular regeneration treatment is complete, and her core temperature has been stable for 6 hours. Now that Lyria could see clearly, she realized this second person was not human, despite their humanoid form. They were small, barely 5 feet tall, with pale, almost translucent skin that seemed to shift colors subtly as they moved, and large, liquid black eyes that contained no visible iris or pupil. This is Roz, Thorne introduced. Ship's engineer, medic, and the real reason you're still breathing. Those pirates would have found you if not for her diversions. Ross approached the berth, moving with the peculiar grace Lyria had glimpsed in the station, the same movements she had caught from the corner of her eye during those 3 desperate days. You were on the station, Lyria said, realization dawning. You left me the heater, the blanket, the map. Roz nodded, a smile revealing teeth that were slightly too sharp to be human. I was completing my own salvage operation when your pod crashed. I was going to leave you alone. Safer that way, usually. But when I saw you burning your clothes for warmth, she shrugged. Ingenious. Desperate. But ingenious. I respect that kind of survival instinct. Why not reveal yourself sooner? Lyria asked. Bloodfrost, Thorne interjected. They've been watching that station for weeks. Roz was trapped there when they established their patrol pattern. She was waiting for a gap in their coverage to get back to the ship. Your crash created that opportunity, Roz added. They diverted resources to investigate the impact site, which gave me a chance to contact Thorne. We were preparing to extract when you started moving toward the central control room. And then you helped me hide from them, Lyria finished. You risked your own escape to save me. Ross made a dismissive gesture. Professional courtesy. One survivor to another. Her expression grew more serious. Besides, I recognized what you were carrying. Virulin genetic stabilizers, correct? Based on extremophile adaptations? Lyria's hand went instinctively to her abdomen, where the sample container remained secured against her body. How did you know? Your notes, Roz said. In the corridor near the auxiliary dock. Fascinating work. Similar to research my people have been conducting, though we've focused more on radiation resistance than cold adaptation. This explanation raised as many questions as it answered, but before Lyria could pursue them, a sharp pain lanced through her chest, causing her to gasp. Roz moved quickly to check the medical monitors. Tissue regeneration, she explained. The frostbite damage was extensive, particularly in your extremities and across your torso. The treatment is working, but it's not comfortable. Will there be permanent damage? Lyria asked, thinking of her mission. She needed to be fully functional to complete the final synthesis of the genetic samples once she reached the research facility on Helios 9. Minimal, Roz assured her. Some scarring on your chest and hands where the cold was most severe. Full functionality should return within days. Relief flooded through Lyria. She would recover. Her mission could continue. Her people might yet be saved. Thank you, she said, the words encompassing both her rescuers. I owe you my life. Thorn shook his head. Save the thanks for when we get you to Helios 9. We're not clear yet. Those Blood Frost ships might still be looking for us. As if summoned by his words, an alarm sounded from the ship's bridge. Thorn cursed and stood quickly. Proximity alert, he explained, already moving toward the door. Roz, stay with her. I'll handle this. After he left, a heavy silence fell over the medical bay. Lyria studied Roz more carefully, noting details she had missed in her initial assessment. The engineer's species was unfamiliar to her, which was unusual. Lyria had encountered most known sentient races during her research travels. You're wondering what I am, Roz said, apparently reading Lyria's curiosity. I apologize if that's rude, Lyria replied. I've just never encountered your species before. Roz made a sound that might have been a laugh. Few have. We're not numerous, and we prefer to keep to ourselves. Let's just say we evolved in an environment that makes Arcturus 7 seem positively tropical. Before Lyria could inquire further, Thorn's voice came over the ship's intercom. Roz, need you on the bridge. Bringing emergency systems online. Roz moved to the door, but paused before exiting. Rest, she instructed Lyria. Your body needs it. We'll handle whatever's out there. Left alone, Lyria found herself too tense to follow Roz's advice. The ship had begun to vibrate subtly, suggesting Thorn had increased power to the engines. They were running, or preparing to. Despite her weakness, Lyria managed to sit up, disconnecting the fluid drip with the practiced movement of someone familiar with medical equipment. Her legs felt unsteady as she slid from the berth, but they supported her weight. The deck was cool beneath her bare feet, but nothing like the killing cold of the station. Looking down, she saw that her ruined clothing had been replaced with a simple medical gown. The sample container, however, remained secured to her abdomen with medical tape. Roz's work, presumably, ensuring the precious cargo wasn't separated from its courier. Lyria made her way slowly to the medical bay's small viewport. Outside, the blackness of space was interrupted by the distant glow of Xylandra, now far behind them. But it wasn't the ice planet that held her attention. It was the other ship visible at the edge of the viewport's field, a sleek, predatory vessel with matte black hull plating, accented with crimson details. Blood Frost. The ship's intercom activated again. Lyria, if you're awake, you might want to secure yourself, Thorn's voice advised. Things are about to get interesting. As if to emphasize his words, the Thorn 1 suddenly lurched, its engines roaring as it accelerated rapidly. Lyria grabbed a support rail to keep from falling, her weakened legs protesting the sudden movement. Through the viewport, she saw energy weapons fire, brilliant red beams that narrowly missed their ship as Thorn executed an evasive maneuver that would have been impressive for a military vessel, let alone a salvage ship. "Thorn!" Lyria called out, hoping the intercom would relay her voice to the bridge. "What's happening?" "Bloodfrost found us," came the terse reply. "They must have tracked your biological signature from the station. Those samples you're carrying are apparently worth the trouble." Another series of evasive maneuvers sent Lyria stumbling back toward the medical berth, where she managed to secure herself with the safety restraints. The ship vibrated around her as Thorn pushed its engines beyond their designed limits. "Can we outrun them?" she asked. A harsh laugh answered her. "This old girl isn't winning any races, but we don't need to outrun them. Just reach the Helios defense perimeter. Another 10 minutes at this burn rate." 10 minutes. It didn't sound like much, but with a Bloodfrost warship in pursuit, it might as well be an eternity. The next few minutes were a blur of violent maneuvers, proximity alarms, and the occasional impact that suggested their pursuers' weapons were finding their mark. At least glancing blows. Lyria clung to the berth, her mind racing. These people, these strangers, were risking their lives for her mission, for samples they had no personal stake in. Or did they? Roz had mentioned research similar to Lyria's own. What if there was more to their rescue contract than Thorn had implied? What if they wanted the samples for themselves? No. Lyria dismissed the thought almost as soon as it formed. If theft had been their motive, they could have simply taken the container while she was unconscious. Instead, they had carefully preserved it, keeping it with her, respecting her mission. A particularly violent impact rocked the ship, sending loose equipment crashing to the deck. The lights flickered, then stabilized. "Shields at 40%, Roz's voice reported over the intercom. "One more direct hit like that and we're exposed." "Rerouting auxiliary power," Thorn responded. 5 more minutes to the perimeter." 5 minutes they might not have. Lyria made a decision, unfastening the restraints. She staggered to her feet and made her way toward what she hoped was the bridge, using the walls for support as the ship continued its erratic, evasive pattern. She found Thorn and Roz on a compact bridge that was clearly designed for a larger crew. Thorn occupied the pilot's seat, his large hands dancing across the controls with surprising delicacy. Roz moved between several stations, managing systems that would normally have dedicated operators. Neither looked up as Lyria entered, too focused on their tasks to spare attention for anything else. "I need to send a transmission," Lyria announced, "to the Helios Defense Force." That got their attention. Thorn glanced at her briefly before returning his gaze to the view screen, where the Bloodfrost ship was visible, closing the distance between them. "Communications are jammed," Roz said, not pausing in her work. "They're blocking all standard frequencies." "Not all frequencies," Lyria countered. "The samples I'm carrying emit a unique quantum signature. The research team on Helios 9 will be monitoring for it. If we can amplify that signature, they'll detect our presence and dispatch interceptors." Thorn and Roz exchanged a quick look that Lyria couldn't interpret. "That would reveal exactly what you're carrying," Thorn said carefully. "To everyone in the sector." Lyria nodded. "A calculated risk, but right now, our survival chances seem to require some calculation." Another impact rocked the ship, harder than before. Warning lights flashed across multiple control panels. "Shields at 23%, Roz reported. "Critical failure imminent." Thorn made a decision. "Do it. Amplifying station is there." He nodded toward a small communication console to the right of his position. Lyria moved to the console, her scientist's mind quickly assessing its capabilities. It was a standard deep space communication array, but with some unusual modifications, likely Roz's work. "I need to access the quantum frequency modulator," Lyria explained as her fingers moved across the controls, "and link it directly to the sample container." Roz appeared at her side, producing a slender cable from a pocket of her utility vest. Will this work? It's a direct neural interface adapter, but it should be compatible with most biological containment systems. Lyria examined the cable briefly, then nodded. Perfect. With Roz's help, she connected one end of the cable to the communication console, and the other to a small port on the sample container still secured to her abdomen. The console's display immediately lit up with a complex waveform, the quantum signature of the biological samples, now being transmitted at maximum power. How long will it take? Thorne asked, executing another evasive maneuver that briefly pressed them all against the deck with multiple G-forces. The signature is distinctive, Lyria said. If they're monitoring for it, they should detect it almost immediately. And if they're not, Roz asked the question Lyria had been avoiding. Then we've just made ourselves an even more valuable target, Lyria admitted. But I believe... She was interrupted by a new alarm, different from the previous warnings. This one was higher-pitched, more urgent. Missile lock, Thorne announced grimly. They're done playing around. On the view screen, they could see the Blood Frost ship launching a projectile, a short-range, high-yield destroyer missile designed to disable or destroy vessels of Thorn 1 size with a single hit. Countermeasures deployed, Roz reported, though her tone suggested she held little hope for their effectiveness. The missile streaked toward them, impervious to the decoys and electronic jamming the Thorn 1 had deployed. Impact was seconds away. Lyria closed her eyes, a strange calm settling over her. She had survived 3 nights in the killing cold of Arcturus 7, only to die here in the void of space. At least the warmth would remain until the end. Then, without warning, the missile detonated, far short of its target. The shockwave still rocked their ship, but the destructive force dissipated harmlessly in the vacuum. "What the?" Thorne began, but was cut off by a new voice coming through the communication system. "Unidentified vessel. This is Helios Defense Force Interceptor Bravo 7. We have detected your quantum signature and are moving to assist. Blood Frost vessel. Power down weapons and prepare to be boarded." Through the view screen, Lyria could now see 3 sleek military vessels converging on their position, their distinctive blue-white engine signatures, identifying them as Helios Defense Force Interceptors. The Blood Frost ship was already turning away, its captain apparently deciding that even valuable biological samples weren't worth facing military intervention. Relief flooded through Lyria, so intense it made her knees buckle. Roz caught her before she could fall, guiding her to a seat at the now inactive communication console. "They came," Lyria whispered, watching as the interceptors took up protective positions around the Thorn 1. "They were monitoring for the signature. Your people must value these samples highly," Thorne observed, finally relaxing his grip on the ship's controls as the immediate danger passed. "They're our last hope," Lyria said simply. "The final key to a genetic treatment that could save my species from extinction." Thorne nodded, a new respect evident in his expression. "Then, I'm glad we could get you this far." He paused, then added more quietly, "And I'm sorry about your clothes." The unexpected comment startled a laugh from Lyria, a sound she hadn't thought herself capable of after the ordeal she had endured. "A small price to pay for survival," she said. "Though I admit, burning them piece by piece was not a strategy I'd learned in any survival training." "Necessity breeds innovation," Roz said, her tone appreciative. "You did what you had to do. We all do." A communication from the lead interceptor interrupted any further conversation, requesting permission to dock and escort them safely to Helios 9. Thorne granted it, then turned to Lyria. "Looks like you'll complete your mission after all," he said. "What happens after you deliver the samples?" Lyria considered the question. She hadn't thought beyond the delivery, her focus so completely consumed by the task of reaching Helios 9 with the samples intact. I don't know, she admitted. Continue my research. I suppose there's still much work to be done even after the samples are delivered. Thorne exchanged another of those unreadable looks with Roz before saying, We might have a proposition for you, once your current mission is complete, if you're interested. Before Lyria could ask what kind of proposition, the ship shuddered slightly as the interceptor established a docking connection. Armed Helios Defense Force personnel would be boarding soon to secure their safety for the remainder of the journey. We'll talk later, Thorne promised, rising from his seat. After we've all had some rest. As they prepared to receive their military escort, Lyria found herself looking forward to that conversation. Whatever proposition Thorne and Roz had in mind, she owed them a hearing at the very least, and perhaps much more. They had saved her life, protected her mission, and in doing so, potentially, saved her entire species. Such a debt could never be fully repaid, but Lyria was determined to try. For now, though, she was content to savor the warmth of the ship, the safety of their military escort, and the knowledge that she had survived against impossible odds. 3 nights freezing in the abandoned station, burning her clothes piece by piece to stay alive, until on the 4th day, a stranger had finally let her in. Not just let her in, but fought to protect her, risked everything to ensure her mission succeeded. In a universe often characterized by indifference or outright hostility, such compassion was perhaps the rarest resource of all. As the Thorn 1 continued its journey toward Helios 9, now safely escorted by the interceptors, Lyria touched the area of her chest where the most severe frostbite had occurred. There would be a scar there, Ross had said, a permanent reminder of her ordeal. But also, Lyria decided, a reminder that even in the coldest depths of space, warmth could be found. Not just the physical warmth of fire or heated ships, but the warmth of connection, of beings helping each other survive. That was a lesson worth carrying forward, whatever came next. Helios 9 appeared in the view screen, its distinctive pink atmosphere glowing like a beacon of hope against the blackness of space. Lyria watched it grow larger as they approached, feeling the weight of the past 4 days, the terror, the pain, the desperate struggle for survival, beginning to lift. There would be time for healing, for gratitude, for new beginnings. For now, it was enough to be warm, to be alive, to have completed her mission against all odds. Enough to know that sometimes, survival depended not just on one's own resourcefulness, but on the unexpected kindness of strangers who, against all reason or expectation, opened their doors and said simply, "Come in, you'll live." And she had,